Hi, everyone, and welcome back. On behalf of everyone at Top Hat, we're very happy to have you with us, and we thank you for choosing to spend your time at Top Hat Summer Camp. For those joining us for the first time, my name is Jake Rutka, and I have the pleasure of being your host for today. As promised, we have another exciting day lined up for you all. Today, we're going to hear from your peers across disciplines on how they use Top Hat to engage students and deepen learning, both in and out of the classroom. Plus, you'll get a chance to see how the active learning platform is closing achievement gaps for students in math and chemistry. We've got an exciting agenda, so let's get started. As with yesterday, I want to encourage you all to use the chat to share ideas, resources, and best practices from your own experiences. And if you have any questions for our presenters, please use the Q&A feature and we'll make sure to get those answered. Okay, on to the first session of the day. We know that students are more stressed and checked out than ever, but that's not stopping these instructors from bucking the trend by using Top Hat to connect with, motivate, and engage their learners. In this session, you'll hear from 3 profs who will give you a behind-the-scenes look at how they're using interactive questions, polls, and discussions to create buzz and make learning more active. To host this panel discussion, please welcome to the virtual stage from our professional services team, Mike DiGregorio.
Thanks, Jake, and welcome everyone. It's great to be here with all of you again at summer camp this year. In my time working with instructors on using Top Hat to achieve and to tackle various teaching and learning challenges, it's become abundantly clear that student engagement is a perennial challenge. It's a hard won and often fragile achievement, and it takes deliberate cultivation and experimentation to find the right formula to turn passive students into active participants in the learning process. Anecdotal evidence suggests that it's become even harder to engage students, but as you shall hear, the good news is there are many instructional techniques we can use to change this state of affairs. The beautiful part of summer camp is that it offers us the opportunity to soak up a little inspiration, gather some new ideas, and to reflect on our own practices as educators. And that's what today's session is all about. For those of us today for whom Top Hat is newly familiar, our mission at Top Hat is to transform student engagement by empowering educators to deliver personalized, meaningful, and equitable learning in their courses. There's a mountain of evidence that suggests that when students are engaged, they are more motivated to learn, and that translates into better academic performance and outcomes. Our mission is all about giving you the tools to make learning active even in the largest classrooms, to enable students to apply learning, to collaborate, to discover, and share together. Today, you're going to hear from 3 faculty and one of our Top Hat instructional designers about how they're using Top Hat polls, quizzes, and discussions to engage students more deeply in learning and to receive the feedback they need to stay motivated and keep moving forward. Most importantly, you're going to learn how these educators think about engagement in their approach to course design. You got a sneak peek about who they are because I clicked ahead too quickly. But today, I'm so delighted to welcome 3 very accomplished and innovative instructors and one of our very accomplished and innovative Top Hat instructional designers. We have Joel Stake from Louisiana Tech, Caitlin Shea Vantine from Florida Atlantic University, Antonia Ingram-Basby from Louisiana State University, and Blajirani from Top Hat's very own instructional design team. Each speaker will share some of the unique ways they're using Top Hat to up the ante on student engagement. Then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So if you've got questions for our speakers, please make sure to use the Q&A feature, just like we did yesterday, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. With that, it is my pleasure to welcome Joel Stake. It's great to have you with us once again, Joel. Perhaps let's start off by you telling us a bit about your background and the course you teach.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. So my name is Joel Stake. I am the Assistant Director of Honors at Louisiana Tech University. And in addition to my role with Honors, I am also a senior lecturer in the School of Biological Sciences. And so I was brought to Louisiana Tech University primarily to teach non-majors biology as part of our general education requirements. Now, I teach in a part of the United States where religion plays a formative role in the education of our students. In biology in particular, the theory of evolution is crucial for helping us understand and explain past, present, and future biological diversity. And so I need to find a way to engage my students so that their background in religion and their faith doesn't feel threatened, but also that they feel open to asking questions and exploring what it is that biology and science in general actually say about the world around us. And so before I can do that, I kind of have to meet them where they are. And so after a general overview of how the class is going to go on the first day, I usually put up this slide. And we have this conversation. And so for the most part, this is how students are used to thinking about this idea of evolution, right? You have these two boxes. It's either creation or evolution, and this is the way they're taught. Now, I utilize this in one of the question modes in Top Hat. Now, Top Hat allows you to ask plenty of different question types, right? And so this is what's called a click on target question. And a click on target question allows the students to do just that. They click on the target. And so I asked them, like, where are you right now in your understanding of biological diversity? If you were going to put yourself in one of these categories, which category would you put you in? And you can see from the results here that for the most part, our students come in and they identify sort of as this creation box. This is what they think about when they think about biological diversity. And so I like to have a conversation around this slide. And for those students that are willing to speak out, like, why did you choose a particular box? What is it that made you think about creation or evolution? And more importantly, you'll see there's a little red hot spot in the middle. And so there are students that sort of hit in between. Why is it that you haven't chosen a particular box? And so as it turns out, right, it isn't as simple as just creation or evolution. And so I introduce students to this particular slide. Now, this is a slide called the Creation Evolution Continuum. It is a resource from the National Center for Science Education, right? And it turns out it's more nuanced than just picking a box of creation or evolution. This continuum goes from the most sort of strict literal view and interpretation of religion of a young earth and a flat earth, all the way to this idea that the only thing that exists is the material world. And so if I'm going to engage students in a conversation, I want them to understand that it's not as simple as just picking one or two boxes, right? That creation versus evolution is really a false dichotomy, that there are a variety of different ways that students can engage this understanding of diversity of life on Earth. And so after I go through all of these various different ideas about how people explore historically and currently the idea of living things on Earth, I ask them again, right? Find your place. Rather than pick a box, find your place on this continuum. And what you can see is rather than this separation between creation and evolution, we see a cluster around the bottom part of this continuum. And what this allows us to do then is it creates a space where we can engage in conversations about biology and about evolution in a way where students don't feel threatened by either their background, or for a lot of students, they'll say, you know what, I was never taught all of these various ideas. This is the first time that I'm hearing about this variation and how people explain the diversity of life on Earth. And so not being able to ask questions as they grew up, right, there's a comfortable space for them to begin to engage in this idea of evolution that explains the diversity of life on Earth, and for the first time question. And I've had several students at the end of the quarter come up to me and say, hey, you know what, I always had questions growing up, but I was never able to ask them, right? I either had to pick creation or evolution, and depending upon which one I picked, right, I either was part of the group or maybe it had some eternal ramifications for me as far as the way I was brought up. But here there's space for them to explore these options and understanding of how diversity gets explained. Now, at the end of this, I'm pretty clear about where biology comes from, right? Which point of view, where on the continuum science exists. this idea of methodological materialism. But again, it creates an opportunity for students to feel like their faith is being at least recognized and acknowledged, and that it's okay to bring it in here as long as we can have conversations when we talk about what biology and what science tells us. How does it explain it? What is the evidence that shows us how things change over time? Now, not every question in class has to be a sledgehammer. So occasionally you can just come into class and use click on target questions for this. Like about halfway through our quarter, everybody gets a little bit tired. And so I want to come into class and I want to know as a professor, what am I getting myself into today? And so I can ask this question, how are you feeling today? And I can put up this slide and the students can click on the various quadrats and they can say, I'm ready to go. And if there's a lot of red and ready to go, I'm ready to go. I can push the pedal to the metal and we can get going. If there's a lot of red in the what class is this, all right, maybe I know I need to ease into the day and ease into the topic, right? But what I find is that as I use this slide over the quarter, the students will easily begin to understand that, hey, he's not just in here to bombard us with all this material, like he really wants us to engage this. And so slowly over time, they'll start to be more prepared and more ready, and there'll be less what class is this and more ready to go, or hey, you know what, just give me a minute and then I'll be ready to go. So that's my time. I appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for letting me share how I use these types of questions in class.
Thank you, Joel, so much for sharing. Click on target questions are one of our most popular features. And as the examples we just saw suggest, there are endless possibilities for using these to set up and launch really meaningful discussions. Now, if you have any questions for Joel, be sure to put them into the Q&A feature. We'll make sure to make a point of answering them. Now, next, I am pleased to introduce our next speaker, Caitlin Shea-Vantine from Florida Atlantic University. Welcome aboard, Caitlin. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the courses you teach.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin. I work at Florida Atlantic University down in Boca Raton, Florida. I am the biology lab supervisor. So I oversee, Mike, can I go to the next slide, please? I oversee most of the undergraduate biology labs, which is about 1,500 students. In each lab section, there's around 24 students, so they're still pretty small. I also supervise most of the graduate students, so they have teaching assistantships, and so these are the students that are actually going to be facilitating the labs. I oversee life science lab for our non-majors, bio lab 1 and 2, so biodiversity and bioprinciples, as well as anatomy and physiology lab. So as you can see, it's a high volume amount of students, but also graduate students. And so I need to make sure that it's very straightforward and easy for students to understand their pathway to success. And so one of the things that I think is most important is the feedback piece. So students typically do not get the opportunity to test themselves about what they know or do not know until a high stakes assessment like the midterm or the final exam. And then in my case, working in biology, the students are also going to be taking specimen-based exams. And so specimen-based exams are different than an online assessment or a pen and paper type exam. These exams involve students moving around the lab space and interacting with true specimens, as you can see, the brain, right? And so studying for these specimen-based exams are challenging for students because it's offered in the 3D space. So not only are students concerned about the content for these types of exams, but they're also nervous about the structure of the overall exam. And so I have found that early feedback is really important for students to have this sort of spaced practice where they're able to test themselves before a high stakes assessment like the midterm. And so I do this in two different ways. In the in-lab space, I use a multiple choice question type. And then in the post-lab space, I use the click on target question. And so with multiple choice questions, we actually have a mini lecture at the beginning of lab, and the TA goes through a series of slides, and interspersed within that slide deck are multiple choice questions. And so the students are able to answer those questions on their phone, on their tablet, on their computer, and they're able to, engage with the TA in that space. And then the TA is able to see and make real-time decisions if those students are on the same page. And as you can see here, all the students that were asked this question, they're on the same page as the TA. They're grasping the concept. The TA feels that they can move forward and, continue on with the lecture. They will be asked a slightly different question, right? And then you can see here that they have slightly different results, right? And so the students thought maybe that they were paying attention to the TA and perhaps were not. And then the TA also is able to say, okay, it seems like a majority of the class is understanding, but we still have some students that selected the incorrect answer, even though they thought that they were right. And so that allows the students to engage with the TA, see where they perhaps didn't get it right the first time, and are now aware of what they might need to study a little bit more closely before an exam or a quiz or something like that. And so it really allows for us to be quite individualized with students in those lab spaces, and that the students also see that while we are lecturing, it's still more of a conversation, and that their understanding of the material is really important to us. And then in the post-lab space, so you can think of this as sort of a homework, type question. I also use the click on target questions. And so in my case, it's usually like an image that's displayed of like a microscope, or also specimens, right? So like very similar to the brain, right? Where students on an exam are going to need to identify a really particular structure of something, okay? And so here you can see that I'm asking the students to identify a picture or a portion of the microscope. Okay, and so students, again, are able to ask this question to themselves during their homework, and then they're able to select what I've predetermined is the correct answer, which is the stage. And so this really gets the students to be able to mimic those exam questions for a specimen-based exam, especially because oftentimes, students are not going to have these specimens in their homes or anything like that. And so it again allows them to mimic the types of questions that are asked of them on a high-stakes assessment. And kind of get that experience. So when they're going into the assessment, they are feeling more confident in their skills. And so again, I think that it's really important when we're thinking about student engagement is that students don't know what they don't know. And so I'm incentivizing the students to pay attention in the lab space by interspersing multiple question or multiple choice question types throughout our lectures to have it be more of a dialogue between the TA and the students. It also allows for the TA to check in with the students to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And then for students to have that confidence being built up that, yes, I know the correct answer, I'm feeling really good, and this is what I really need to study for the next quiz. And in my case as well, those click on target question types really do set students up for success for the exams, because they're able to mimic at home that in-class experience.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. You make a really great point. Using multiple choice and click on target and other question types is about more than just getting students engaged and processing material in class. It's also about getting that immediate feedback on where they stand and where they may need to focus more energy. It also is, I think, implicitly giving you permission to spend a little bit more time in class on some of those questions, which is always nice. And I'd add it can go a long way to create a more inclusive learning environment. It's important for students to see that even when they don't get an answer right, more often than not, they're not the only ones who may be struggling. So thank you very much, Caitlin, for sharing all of that. Okay, it's time for our third and final instructor. I'm happy to introduce Antonia Ingram-Basby from Louisiana State University. So glad to have you with us again, Antonia. You're a summer camp alumnus, always happy to have you here. So now, Antonia, perhaps start off again telling us a little bit about your philosophy of give and take, and especially when it comes to student engagement. We'd love to hear about that.
Yes, thank you so much, Mike, and greetings to everyone today. Again, my name is Antonia Ingram-Basby, and I'm currently a PhD candidate in cultural anthropology at LSU, and I'm set to graduate this December, so I'm excited about that. And in addition to assisting the professors in advanced level courses, I'll also teach our Introduction to Social and Cultural Anthropology course, which normally has an enrollment of about 140 students. So I have a lot of experience with teaching a lot of students at one time using Top Hat. And really and truly, because I had the unique position of being a PhD student and sitting on that side, and also being an instructor, my philosophy on student engagement really involves both giving and receiving feedback. Because I don't just expect my students to engage, I want to also actively listen to them and provide them feedback, which may include follow-up questions for them to consider and reflect on their responses. Additionally, I really encourage my students to ask me questions. And my goal in doing this is to engage with them and bring them directly into the course content. Now, you may be wondering, why Top Hat? Why does Top Hat stand out from other learning management systems like Moodle, Blackboard, and maybe even Canvas? Well, Top Hat offers a more modern and interactive approach to teaching with tools that can keep the students engaged in real time. And unlike Moodle and Blackboard, Top Hat provides a multi-dimensional learning experience that feels like being in a modern lecture hall, like the one you see here on the screen. While Moodle and Blackboard offer discussion options, they are more one-dimensional and they feel like the old lecture halls that many of us may have lurking around our universities. However, it is common knowledge that having the latest and most sophisticated tools, and Mike, you can go to the next slide for me, please, isn't enough. And to ensure a successful interaction with my students, I make sure to create a well thought out plan, which starts with the way in which I design my course materials, because really and truly engagement begins by ensuring that the content is going to reflect the needs, the interests, and the makeup of your students. We all have students that come from very diverse backgrounds, and we really need to make sure that we are bringing them into the course content. So, one of the ways that I do this is the way in which I design my course, and the next slide will show us that. So here you can see the course organization, and it's really organized beforehand. I try to do this before the semester starts so that when the students log on, they have a good roadmap and they can see very clearly what we're going to do from week to week. They have different sections, like you see the one here that's highlighted, where they have syllabus and other useful information, which is a good place to put some of those tutorials that you may find helpful for the students to go back and be able to revisit should they have any questions about how to use Top Hat. Because it's common knowledge that having the most and the latest and the greatest and sophisticated tools isn't enough. And so to ensure that I have a successful interaction with my students, I want to make sure that I start here with a well thought out plan that we can all kind of use as our roadmap for the semester. So now, how do I effectively motivate my students in class after designing the course? I find that incorporating polling and interactive questions, and we'll see that next on the slide here, really can help you with that. And you may be wondering to yourself, well, when do I implement these? So let's take a look at some of the examples directly from my course materials that'll help us kind of get some ideas of when you can use these particular ones. So first and foremost, my subject matter, we deal with a lot of dense subjects. So one of the ways in which I use polling is to talk about those dense subjects where my students may not want to be known and they may want to remain anonymous. So this is one example from one week in which we were talking about race. And as you can see, it was done as a polling. So again, we can still use this material in order to engage in class and have a discussion around it, but no one is going to know who said what. And so it gives the students an ability to be able to still engage, but also have that feeling of being safe in doing so. Another way that we can also do it is to really introduce a new concept. And I like to do that by asking questions such as, how would you greet a friend? Are there any ways in which you would greet your friends versus at LSU? And all of you know that a school like LSU, there's going to come up a lot of different responses. And so this was my way of actually introducing them to the various languages and linguistic anthropology. So again, these are some of the creative ways in which you can bring your students directly into your course content. So what are these benefits of using polling in lectures? So one, again, it allows your students to remain anonymous while everyone's voice is going to be heard. We have those students that they're scared to talk, especially in a lecture room of 140 students. I would be scared to really talk, probably. And so you also can motivate them by engagement that really kind of responds out of the ordinary. Students don't know from class period to class period what you're going to ask them. So it allows that kind of in the moment, ordinary engagement as well. And then also when students have a choice, it really kind of makes it easier for them to respond to those challenging topics. So these are some of the benefits that you can incorporate in using those polling questions and polling in your lectures as well. So to kind of bring all of this together, students will have the interest to engage when it's relevant to their lives, when you can bring your course material and you can apply it to something that they can see as being relevant. And then also, if it's information that they need to solve a problem. So think about those ways in which you can kind of take something that is funny or something that may be a trending, so to speak, in social media, because we all know that the students are on social media, but also bring it into your course material. And then also it provides them an opportunity for them to show off their knowledge. And they have been engaged enough when you do all of this where they can truly walk away at the end of the semester seeing the value in taking your course. So thank you all today for your time.
Thank you, Antonia. I appreciate how thoughtful you are in terms of using Top Hat to manage the ebb and flow of engagement in your classroom. Having the right tools is important. Knowing when to use them and to give students a break or prime them from what's coming next is just as important. And you provided us some great examples and some really thought-provoking ideas for how to do that. So now I'd like to pass it over to our last panelist of this session, Top Hat's very own Balazs Jarani, one of our fantastic instructional designers who helps faculty get started creating these engagement activities in their courses. So Balazs, I'd like to start out with a question for you. Based on what we've heard and from the panelists today and your experience supporting educators like them, what are some low effort, high impact ways to get started with producing more engagement with Top Hat?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. So hello, everyone. My name is Balazs. Like Mike said, I'm an instructional designer here at Top Hat. And yeah, I've worked with tons of professors. And I think it really is not a one size fits all solution here. And so for every different, instructor is going to be a different sort of understanding of what is the best way to engage their students. And it really depends on, as you see on the slide here, how you want students to interact and where that is they're interacting, right? And so, if you want them to interact with other learners, with the instructors, with yourself, with the content, and where that happens, whether that's in the classroom, in a lecture setting, in a general, classroom environment, or whether that's, with the homework or with content that you're providing to them. I think that's really the first question that you want to ask is, how do I want my learners to interact? And what do I want them to interact with? But to answer your question, in terms of having a low effort and high impact usage of Top Hat, one of the things that I would say is, utilizing the strategies that were mentioned by all of our speakers, right? All of our speakers are using Top Hat in very high impact ways, which don't require a whole lot of commitment on behalf of the professor, right? Adding in questions, adding in multiple choice questions within the slides, adding in polling questions to check in on students, click on target questions, right? Asking these different question types is really, a simple way to get students to engage, because it shows them that there is more to a classroom and more to a lecture than sitting and listening to a professor or to an instructor lecture, right? And again, going back to the point where it's not a one size fits all thing for sure, but thinking about these questions and utilizing those different question types depending on how they're relevant to you is absolutely a great way to get started on using Top Hat.
So I know a big focus for our team of instructional designers is really helping professors get started thinking about and thinking in new ways or reimagining how they're facilitating active learning. Can you sort of help us or walk us through how you might help somebody sort of start this process?
Oh yeah, it's a great question. I think a great framework to utilize for us, especially as instructional designers, is the sort of 5 pillars of instructional design that we have on our next slide here. And so all of our speakers, and I really, really enjoyed listening to all of our speakers speak, because they all touched upon a different part of these, these pillars, right? Especially, intentional interactions. One thing that Antonia mentioned is you want to be intentional with how you interact with students. You don't want to just ask them random questions. You don't want to just, continue talking at them. You want to be intentional. You want to be purposeful in how you interact with them, and ensure that what you're, talking to them about is relevant to their lives, right? And then that, kind of goes into that 1st and 4th pillar that we talk about as well, inclusive design, making sure that we take into consideration all the different demographics of the students, all their different lived experiences, and show that that content is reflecting their lived experiences and in the questions that we're asking them. And the objective aligned content is, what am I trying to achieve in this class? So Joel mentioned that as well, where, trying to take this group of students who may have some preconceived notion about biology going into the class, and kind of seeing how we can bring them into the conversation while also incorporating biology into it. So these 5 pillars are really a great way of doing that. And I think a tool in Top Hat that allows instructors to start doing that is the gradebook, which I believe you're going to touch upon next.
Yes, I am. So obviously, big part of engagement is gathering data, understanding where students are. I think that our instructor panelists today all approach that in their own unique way. A best practice that I saw represented in Caitlin's slides is like understanding that when 4 out of 15 students are getting something wrong, or like 1 out of every 5, it's actually a good opportunity to stop and reteach. So can you walk us through how instructors can use the Top Hat gradebook to aid this decision-making progress, and what a good example looks like?
100%, yeah, and I think the Top Hat gradebook is a massive asset to anybody that's using Top Hat, and so I would highly suggest, and I definitely do suggest to anybody who has worked with me before, perhaps, highly suggest using the gradebook, because it gives you so many insights on your students and on how they're learning that can be so helpful. And again, like Antonia mentioned, it's about giving and receiving feedback, right? You receive all this feedback from students, and then you can provide this same feedback that you have in the gradebook back to the students and allow them to understand, where am I going wrong? What do I need to understand here? And so I want to give a big shout out to Professor Beth Morley, actually at University of Texas, San Antonio, who's been using the gradebook really effectively. And this is a screenshot that you can see from one of her courses, where so much data is, inputted in here, right? And if you go directly, even deeper into the attendance column, that's another way that you can kind of get students engaged, is using that sort of attendance feature, which again, very low effort, but very high impact. Get information on, okay, are students coming to class? If not, maybe I need to change something, maybe they need to change something, maybe something needs to change here, right? And so you can see every single week, she's taking attendance here, and she can see the column of how many students are showing up, and you can see that it's making an impact, right? A lot of students across the board are showing up quite, you have regularly hitting, 70%, 75, 80%, attendance. You see there's maybe one student there that's not attending very regularly, and that's actually me. I'm enrolled in her course as well, so I need to up my attendance there. But using these data and leveraging these insights in order to provide that feedback to students is going to, have them be very thankful. And I'm not so far removed from being a student as well. I graduated in 2021, right after the pandemic. And, I was always looking for feedback from my professors as well, from my instructors. And it was helpful for me to understand where I was going wrong and how I could improve in class as well. So I think using this gradebook and leveraging the data and the insights that come with it is massively impactful for, any instructor. And I would highly suggest using it.
Excellent. Thank you, Balazs. One theme from your last answer, which I want to pick up on, is the first pillar of the 5 pillars of a dynamic courseware is objective aligned content, which I think Antonia's course was a really great example of. And we're going to get to Donna Smith's question on that topic in a moment. But it's a nice feature of Top Hat that when you align your course nicely in the list of course content, that's reflected in the gradebook. So everything is very easy to interpret. Okay, so on the note of Q&A, I would love to get to thank you first of all for everybody's attention and for inputting some questions here today. The first question is from Donna Smith, also former and previous Top Hat Summer Camp presenter, and it's directed to Antonia, but I suspect all of our panelists might have some input here. So could you elaborate a little bit further on your course design, Antonia?
Certainly, yes. And thank you so much, Donna, for that question. So one of the things that I found to be very helpful is to definitely design the course by weeks. That way, the students will have more accessibility and they can easily find everything that they need right there by weeks, rather than doing a unit where there may be a lot of content under one folder. And so for me, that's what I found to be the most helpful as far as designing the course out.
Excellent. Caitlin or Joel, I'll give you the space to answer if you'd like to elaborate a little further on your course design as well.
I think that's a great note. I make use of the folders feature as well for the labs, right? Lab 1, lab 2. And then I actually will break it into like pre-lab. So I will assign students reading as well as some questions there. The in-lab, we'll have some work for them to accomplish all together. And then, in that post-lab is really where I am implementing those click on target question types and a couple of other, post-lab materials. So students understand sort of how all the materials are nested together for that 1 week or that one lab.
Yeah, and it's the same. I organize by weeks with pre-readings and some questions they answer ahead of class, so that again, when they come to class, they're at least mildly prepared. I still like to ask them, how prepared are you? Just so I know what I need to go back over. So same.
Excellent. Yeah. There's many ways that we've described that pre, during, post, or before, during, after class. And the more, or the easier I should say it is for students to follow that path, the easier it is for them to stay engaged through all the content. I'm going to ask a follow-up here and would love to hear from the three of you what your thoughts are on getting the right balance between lecturing and active learning, or delivering material in class and making space for engagement. Is there a rule of thumb that you follow for what the right amount of activities would be, or the right number of minutes in an hour for student election, student engagement in a lecture? So would love to hear from the three of you on that. Maybe we'll start with Joel. He looks the most eager to speak.
Yeah, I mean, biology is pretty content driven. And usually, even though they've had biology in high school, some of the things we do at the university level, it's a little bit deeper. I try to keep it to between 10 and 15 minutes before I'll either ask them to interact, or we'll do an activity, or I'll use a question type, multiple choice, those kind of things, to just kind of check back in on what we've done. Because it can get overwhelming. So for me, it's about 15 minutes before I do a check-in, regroup, see where we are, and then decide whether we're going to move forward or revisit what we just talked about.
I'll go next. I would like to say that definitely, kind of just to also elaborate on what Joel just said, I think it's like really it's kind of trial and error, to be honest with you, because I know that first week or two, you're still trying to learn your students and really kind of learn really what's going to work best for that particular group. So I don't think it's a one size fit all kind of an answer, but I think by the first or second week, you should have a good handle on your students and kind of your classroom culture, so to speak, to know, okay, I can probably put in a question maybe every couple of slides. But really and truly, you just kind of got to fill it out, so to speak, and just really kind of see how your class is going to flow for that particular semester, where you'll be comfortable in balancing the content and the engagement as well.
Yes, I completely agree. Kind of what's already been stated. I think for my courses, being in a lab space, most of the time that they're there are to train their hands, right? To actually do whatever experiment we're trying to do for that day. And so our lectures are relatively short. And I will use those multiple choice kind of question types to make sure they've done their pre-reading before lab, but also to make sure that they understand. I'll also use them for like the processes in lab, right? So to make sure that they understand, you know, that this is dangerous, right? Or that this needs to be added in this way, in this step. And so kind of to check in and to kind of prepare them for the hands-on activities after the mini lecture portion.
Yes, thank you all. Cliff has asked a really great question, so I'm going to jump to it. Always interested in the quote, what not to do. So any hints, tips about common mistakes or misuses or overreaches of, it's specifically Top Hat, but let's say just overreach of like an improper use of tech in the classroom.
I don't mind going first on this one. Definitely have learned some things. I think that we get super excited about the content, right? And we really want the students to like be engaged the entire time, right? But I think that Joel and Antonia touched on this as well, is that it can be almost too much to pepper them with questions like slide, question, While yes, the content is extremely important for the entire time that you're together, I think that the students kind of become oversaturated with that sort of practice. And so I think best practice is a handful of questions, or at potentially like a certain minute marker, because you get excited, but it's a little too much for them. And it actually loses what you're trying to create in the classroom space, from my experience.
So a little bit, you can have too much of a good thing.
Absolutely, because I think that speaks to someone else had a question about the burnout. I think Abigail, yeah, I think her question kind of really ties into that, because you can burn yourself out, and that's easy for that to happen around week 3 for many of us. And so I think I know for me, rather than focusing on just a bombardment of questions, focus on maybe just a few good questions. And you'll be surprised if you focus on just really impactful, great questions, the students usually will carry the discussion where you may not even need a lot of questions. So I think that would be my advice, is just to focus on a couple of really great questions if you do find yourself kind of falling into that slump of burnout.
I'll jump in here, and I know Balazs recommends these a lot. We have in the Top Hat catalog, so a folder of templated questions specifically for this purpose, and it's stuff that's metacognitive in nature. So how confident do you feel about today's material? How well could you answer, today's question on a test? What's the muddiest point from today's lecture? Write a 1-minute essay before we leave today. So like it's content agnostic, and still will provide that sort of high impact engagement and consolidation of learning that you're looking for without adding a ton of preparation time. Great. And actually on the, I think Abigail's question is a great one. Caitlin or Joel, do you have any insights here on how to avoid the desire to sort of take on too much and not feel yourself burned out on the creation of, interactive content throughout the year?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's no set rule, but just in general, like just because you can do it doesn't mean you should, right? It has to be impactful and intentional, as opposed to just bombarding them with pre-reading and questions and in-class questions and post questions. Like you want them to know that the assessment, formative or summative, matters for their learning, as opposed to just busy work.
I completely agree. And I think it's really important for students kind of buy-in, is that they see that you're there and that you're trying, right? And that you're there and you're there for them. And, you're trying to make the course interesting to them, trying to make it relevant. And so I think students really are kind of about that, right? They're like, okay, this person, is interested in me, and we're going to be working together through this material. So I think that that can be really important. And I think also asking your students, like, how did today go? How do you feel about that? To Mike's point, it can go a long way with the students.
Yeah, Mike, just to add, one of my favorite comments that I ever got from a student was, I still don't like biology after this class, but I learned a little bit and it was fun. So,
That used to be our old motto, fun and effective. So you're living it, Joel. So thank you, all of you. We could talk about student engagement forever because it is a constant challenge and an important one to face. So thank you again to our guest speakers for sharing all of this great information with us today. So many great ideas to inspire us. I'd also encourage you to learn more about how you can up the ante on student engagement using Top Hat. You can respond to the poll we just launched literally a couple seconds ago, and a Top Hat team member will be ready to help you out. So before we close, I want to highlight what's next for summer camp. So you're going to hear more from your faculty peers about how they're using Top Hat using Top Hat's content solutions to improve student engagement outside the classroom in our next session. And then we're going to wrap up Summer Camp 2023 with a look at how we're helping STEM instructors close the achievement gap in chemistry and math. Justin Weinberg, the founder of Active, will share how Active's pioneering learning solutions are changing the game by helping students visualize, interact with, and master the most challenging concepts. This is a great opportunity to see how Active's low stakes assessments and adaptive feedback are improving student outcomes in math and chemistry with more engaging supportive learning. All the best, and thank you for joining us.